Persuasion Unit 1 highlights. Larson says that we are engulfed in a sea of information. The models that you'll discover in Unit 1, Chapters 1 through 4, help us to navigate that sea of information. These models can be used both creatively to start a new campaign or analytically to analyze what you have already discovered. We'll start with Rank's model of intensify downplay. Those two major strategies tell what we can do to put emphasis on our message, to create attention for our message through the strategies of repetition, association, and composition. Repetition lies in taking a key thematic and making sure that's repeated, such as the McDonald's sign of the Golden Arches or Nike's swoosh, to make sure that you have something that is clearly remembered and familiarized by your audience. Association means linking your product or service idea to something that the audience favors, or your opponent's idea to something the audience holds in disregard. Composition refers to changing or playing around with the physical makeup, the graphics of the message, in order to make your message compelling. In Downplay with Rank's model, there are three strategies called omission, which means leaving out or deleting information, diversion, which means shifting attention to something else than the main topic, or the idea that there is confusion, which may mean anything from jargon to tiny font that's very difficult to read. In all of these strategies, you are encouraged to keep an ethical pattern so that you're not leaving out information that the audience may need that may be critical to that message. You don't want to divert attention unless that would help to get on safer ground until you're ready to return to the controversial issue. And you certainly don't want to confuse your audience so that they don't have the correct facts or the ideas that they should be focused upon. So Rank's model is one that I hope you can use as a consideration in building your persuasion playbook. We also have in this unit the idea of artistic proofs, the idea that persuaders are artists, and that anything that is within the realm of artistic creation is what is the palette that's available to the persuader to take their message, make it artistic, make it meaningful, make it unique as a signature to their own persuasive ideas. The SMCR model in persuasion comes actually from engineering, and it starts with a source, that is the encoder of the message. It goes to the message content itself. It travels across a particular channel, such as this YouTube video, or the channel of your Twitter messages. So whatever channel is used to communicate the message. And then finally, and probably most importantly, the receiver is the audience members who are going to review the message and consider whether or not they will adopt that message based on what they have seen so far. Aristotle emphasizes three major components of persuasion. Those are ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is character. It is the reputation, it is the trustworthiness, it is the expertise, it is the dynamism, the goodwill that emanates from the source or the sender of the message. Aristotle believed, quite properly, that ethos is the make or break of proof that if we trust someone, that we're much more likely to be willing to listen to their message. However, if that trust has been damaged or that link of trust has been in some way broken, that it's very difficult, even with pathos and logos, to get that message across. So ethos reminds us that it's a lifetime of building character through experience and through honesty and trustworthiness. We also have, in Aristotle's view, pathos, which refers to our emotions, our virtues, and the ways that our feelings affect the ways in which we are ready to make a decision or need to put that decision off until our emotions are more in line with making a good decision. And then finally, logos or logic, the rational calculus that tells us about the data That is, the statistics, the specific examples, the testimonials that comprise the rationality of whether a policy is worthy or whether another version of the policy needs to be reviewed. We find in Chapter 2 references to the Golden Rule, which you may be familiar with. That is the do unto others as we would have done to ourselves. But what may be new to you here is also the Platinum Rule. And the Platinum Rule suggests that we do unto others as they would have done unto them. And so that takes some reading of the audience, some discovery of what they would want, not necessarily how we would go about it, our preference, but the Platinum Rule emphasizes what would the audience want to have done to them. We also see in this chapter ethical perspectives. These include the human nature perspective, which asks, what makes us uniquely human? Whether that's the ability to create and preserve music, whether that's the imaginative capacity to build the future, or the historical legacies that we're able to carry on in museums and other traditions. So the human perspective ethically will look at what creates a human being, different from any other member, any other species or genus that we might think of, what makes us uniquely human. We also have an ethical perspective called the political perspective, which looks at not the individual's welfare, but what is necessary for the functioning of the government, what is necessary to preserve the state and the state's policies and procedures. So this asks very different kinds of questions ethically. So if you were looking at the issue of surveillance versus privacy, someone looking from a political perspective may have quite a different answer about what constitutes fair or necessary surveillance than one who is looking at more of a human nature perspective about our quest for privacy. We also have the legal perspective, which asks, is it specifically illegal? And that helps to determine the ethicality of something. And then there is the situational perspective, which judges the merits of each particular case. So instead of making generic rules about something, we look at the particulars of the case and try to make determinants based on those contextual factors. And then finally, the dialogical perspective, which tells us that we will make a better decision, time permitting, if we have a chance for input, for dialogue, for discussion, for debate, to have that exchange of information will likely yield a better result. In part, our jury system, though it may sound like the legal system, relies on the dialogical perspective to try to get input from different jurors before they make a decision as to guilt or not guilt. Also in our chapter, you'll find Plato's dialogical approach. Plato liked to engage through characters and plays a dialogue that started out with certain definitional perspectives and then pursued the matter at an ever deeper level to discover dialogically what might be true and fitting and good in a particular situation. Then you'll discover Scott's epistemological approach, and Scott had a very different view from Plato coming along in the 20th century. Scott looked not at truth with a capital T, but looked at the ways that our symbols, our language, actually helps to influence and thus create our attitudes and our actions about a variety of ways in which we live and a variety of ways in which we're willing to go about our lives. So instead of our words and symbols merely mirroring the world around us, it actually helps to constitute, to create that world symbolically for us. Quintilian was very focused as a Roman orator on the concept of character, and he defined rhetoric or persuasion as the art of the good man or the good person speaking well. So someone with character, someone with knowledge on the subject, and someone who could be in a position to be well spoken about that particular subject. Fisher's narrative approach goes to the fact that we are storytelling creatures, that within this sea of information, we look for stories. We look for stories from the time we're little and hear Once Upon a Time to Happily Ever After. We look in our quest for stories in jury decision making. We look in films that we go see and political speeches that we hear. We look for an individual story, and we judge that story based on the criteria of coherence. That is, does it hang together logically, sequentially, in a rational manner? And then we also look at a story and judge it by its fidelity. Does it ring true with what we know and what we believe about our world? And that is Fisher's narrative approach. And then finally, as you take a look at Chapter 4, notice especially anchor effects. And that sea of information that we're engulfed with causes us to put down anchors. And those anchors are what we stake our lives on, what we stake our values on, how we form our attitudes, and whether we're willing to shift away from that or go back to our anchors. The anchor effects are closely tied in with social judgment involvement theory, where we have 3 different latitudes, and those influence the ways our anchors are staked. Those latitudes include, first of all, a latitude of acceptance. It's your green zone. So things that you hear that sound similar enough to your anchor will go into that latitude of acceptance. Those things you know and accept related to something new, and if they seem similar enough, close enough, it probably goes right into your latitude of acceptance and much easier to persuade you within that green zone. Then we have a latitude of rejection, just the opposite, which is our red zone, and that is something that would endanger our anchor, something that would cause us to have to uplift our anchor. So a social policy or change that would be very different from what we've anchored our traditions in might become a latitude of rejection, our red zone, that we simply do not accept. And the very interesting thing about this latitude of rejection is the boomerang effect. And sometimes the more intensely we try to press our case to an audience or an audience member who has rejected our ethos, our pathos, our logos, sometimes the harder we try, the more likely that message is to come right back to us, not having been received at all by the recipient, and actually having the recipient move further away from our position than they were originally, because they contrast that with their own anchor and they reject it. And then the third option is called a latitude of non-commitment. Of course, in that sea of information, we can't know and be concerned about everything that is in the world. We have to have our focus, we have our limits of attention, and we have the dimensions that we're able to deal with, the dimensions we care about, the dimensions we have knowledge about, and the things that we don't yet have enough information to make a judgment on may go into a latitude of non-commitment, or things that are not vital to our particular present case may also go into a latitude of non-commitment. There's great persuasion potential both in the latitude of non-commitment, because that's where you have a chance to make the audience see how they need to care or could care about the issue and move it closer to their latitude of acceptance. So these are some of the highlights from Unit 1, Chapters 1 through 4 in Larson, and I hope you'll enjoy studying each of these as the course develops.